I don't usually stop at diners, especially the sketchy-looking ones. But that night, I didn't have much of a choice. The highway stretched on endlessly, cutting through miles of barren land and darkness. My stomach growled, my eyes felt heavy, and the glowing open 24/7 sign of Maggie's Diner flickered like a neon beacon in the pitch-black night. The place was a cliché, isolated, perched on the side of the road like it had been forgotten by time. The parking lot was empty except for a single rusted-out pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. The fluorescent lights inside gave the diner an eerie, washed-out glow. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle, but hunger won over caution. As I stepped inside, a bell jingled above the door, cutting through the muffled hum of an old jukebox playing a distorted, off-key version of Blue Moon. The air smelled faintly of burnt grease and something else I couldn't quite place. Something metallic. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. There were only 3 people inside. A waitress leaning against the counter, staring off into space. A man in a trucker hat hunched over a coffee cup in the farthest booth. And an old cook in the kitchen, visible through the serving window, his back turned to me. "Sit wherever you want, Han," the waitress said without looking up. Her voice was monotone, almost robotic. I slid into a booth near the window, the cracked vinyl seat creaking under my weight. The menu was sticky, its laminated surface peeling at the edges. I wasn't picky, I just needed something to keep me awake. "Coffee and a burger," I said when she finally shuffled over. She scribbled it down on a notepad without saying a word and walked away. Her movements were strange, stiff, like she was forcing herself to stay upright. I glanced around the diner again. The man in the trucker hat hadn't moved. He was staring into his coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. That's when I noticed something odd. There was no sound coming from the kitchen. No sizzling, no clatter of pans, nothing. Just the occasional dull scrape of the waitress's shoes against the tiled floor. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt off. When the waitress brought my coffee, I couldn't help but ask, "Slow night?" "Huh?" She froze for a split second before answering. "Yeah, always is." Her eyes darted toward the man in the trucker hat, then back to me. "You're just passing through, right?" I nodded. "Heading west." She opened her mouth to say something, then stopped. Her gaze shifted to the window behind me, and her face went pale. I turned to look, but all I saw was my reflection in the glass, distorted by the dim light. "Your burger'll be out soon," she said abruptly, and hurried back to the counter. I glanced at the man in the trucker hat again. He was watching me now, his face partially hidden in the shadow of his cap. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, almost predatory. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. And then, from the kitchen, I heard it. Faint, wet drip, drip, drip. It sounded like something was leaking, or bleeding. The sound was faint, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. Drip, drip, drip. I glanced toward the serving window that looked into the kitchen. The cook was still standing there, his back to me, not moving an inch. His posture seemed wrong, rigid, almost unnatural. I thought maybe he hadn't heard the noise, but surely a leak that steady would have caught his attention. The waitress avoided eye contact as she wiped down the counter, even though it was already spotless. She was moving in small, nervous circles like she had nowhere else to go. I tried to distract myself by sipping the coffee she'd brought, but it tasted burnt and bitter. As I set the mug down, I noticed something strange about the man in the trucker hat. He wasn't drinking his coffee. He was just holding the cup, staring at it. That's when I saw his hand. It was trembling, ever so slightly. Not like he was cold, but like he was trying to hold back some deep, inner fear. His knuckles were white, and his fingers gripped the cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. I decided to ask, "Hey, buddy, you good over there?" He didn't respond. He didn't even look up. But his breathing grew heavier, louder, and I swear I saw a bead of sweat roll down his temple. The dripping sound from the kitchen got louder. "Hey, I raised my voice, trying to get the cook's attention. "You got a leak back there or something?" The cook didn't move. The waitress snapped her head toward me, her eyes wide with what I can only describe as panic. "Don't," she started, then stopped herself. She glanced at the trucker, then at the window and lowered her voice. "Just eat your food when it comes out and go. Don't ask questions." My stomach twisted. I wasn't scared, yet, but something about her tone made my skin crawl. "What's going on here?" I asked, leaning forward in my seat. She didn't answer. She just turned and disappeared into the kitchen. For a moment it was quiet again, except for the sound of that incessant dripping. Drip, drip, drip. Then the trucker spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped here," he muttered without looking up. His voice was low, gravelly, and filled with something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or regret. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. He finally looked at me, and his face sent a shiver down my spine. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale and clammy, like he hadn't slept in days. "This place isn't right," he whispered. "People who come here don't always leave." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as some local ghost story or a bad joke. "Yeah, okay. Sure thing, buddy." He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "I've seen things," he continued, his voice barely audible. "Things you wouldn't believe. People disappearing, screaming in the night. And that cook back there?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "He's not normal." Before I could respond, the waitress reappeared from the kitchen, holding a plate with my burger and fries. Her hands were shaking as she set it down in front of me. "There you go," she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. I glanced at the plate. The burger looked fine, but the fries were undercooked, pale and soggy. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, nodding toward the kitchen. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but then she just shook her head. "Eat up," she said, her voice tight. "You don't want to stick around too long." That was the second warning I'd gotten, and this time it hit harder. My appetite vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Suddenly, there was a loud clang from the kitchen, like a pot or pan hitting the floor. "Damn it," the waitress muttered under her breath. She glanced at the trucker, who stared back at her with an expression that screamed, "Don't do it." But she went anyway, disappearing through the swinging doors. That's when I noticed something. The dripping had stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, and my pulse quickened as I strained to hear anything. Footsteps, voices, anything at all. But there was nothing. No waitress, no cook, no sound. Just me, the trucker, and the oppressive quiet of that cursed diner. And then the lights started to flicker. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as they flickered, casting long, jittery shadows across the diner. My stomach churned as the sense of unease that had been building all night finally turned into full-blown dread. The man in the trucker hat had gone deathly still, his gaze locked on the swinging doors to the kitchen. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. First, I didn't. The silence was so thick it pressed against my ears. But then I caught it. Faint, barely audible. A low, guttural sound, like something breathing, slow and deliberate. I stood up from the booth, my legs unsteady. "What the hell is going on here?" I said, my voice louder than I intended. "Sit down," the trucker snapped, his tone sharp, almost panicked. "You don't want to draw its attention." "Its attention? What the hell are you talking about?" I took a step toward the kitchen, determined to get some answers. The trucker shot out of his seat, his hand grabbing my arm in a vice grip. His eyes were wide and wild. "You don't understand," he hissed. "Once you see it, it's too late. Just sit down and wait. It might let us go." I yanked my arm free, my frustration overriding my fear. "Look, man, I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but I'm not sticking around to." The swinging doors creaked open. I froze mid-sentence as the doors swung back and forth, revealing nothing but darkness beyond them. The kitchen lights were off, and the dim glow from the diner's fluorescent bulbs barely penetrated the shadowy void. "Where's the waitress?" I demanded, but my voice cracked, betraying my fear. The trucker didn't answer. He was staring at the doors, his breathing shallow and fast. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the flickering lights, a shadow shifting in the darkness. But as it moved closer, I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was something alive. A figure emerged from the kitchen, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. It was tall, too tall to be the waitress, and its limbs were thin, almost skeletal. Its head lolled to one side, and its eyes, God, its eyes were empty sockets, dark holes that seemed to swallow the light around them. I stumbled back, knocking over my coffee mug. The sound shattered the silence, and the thing's head snapped toward me with a sickening crack. "Don't move," the trucker whispered, his voice barely audible. "It can't see you if you don't move." I didn't know if I believed him, but I wasn't about to test the theory. I stayed frozen in place, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The creature took a step closer, its bony feet scraping against the tiled floor. Its head twitched as it sniffed the air, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the metallic smell I'd noticed earlier wasn't coming from the food. It was coming from it. The trucker wasn't as lucky. He shifted slightly, trying to press himself deeper into the corner of his booth. The creature's head snapped toward him, and it let out a low, inhuman growl that sent chills down my spine. "Don't," the trucker started to say, but before he could finish, the thing lunged at him. It moved faster than anything that size should have been able to, its skeletal hands grabbing the man and slamming him against the table. He screamed, a blood-curdling sound that echoed through the diner, but it was cut short as the creature's jaw unhinged, impossibly wide, and clamped down on his throat. I turned away, choking back bile as the sound of tearing flesh filled the air. Couldn't look, couldn't move, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I forced myself to turn back, trembling. The booth was empty, the trucker gone. Blood smeared the table and floor, glistening under the flickering lights. The creature stood there, hunched and still, its empty sockets staring at nothing. And then it turned toward me. The creature tilted its head toward me, its movements unnatural and deliberate, like it was studying me. My entire body screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were bolted to the floor. The thing stepped closer, the sound of its bony feet scraping the tiles sending chills down my spine. Its jaw hung slightly open, and that metallic stench intensified, filling my nostrils. I needed to move. I needed to do something. The trucker's words echoed in my mind. "It can't see you if you don't move." But how long could I stand there, frozen, while that thing crept closer? I glanced at the front door out of the corner of my eye, gauging the distance. Maybe 10 feet. 10 feet between me and freedom, but the creature was between me and the exit. The creature took another step, its skeletal fingers twitching. It let out a low, guttural sound that almost sounded like it was breathing, or maybe growling. Couldn't tell. Suddenly, the jukebox in the corner crackled to life, emitting a distorted, warbled tune. The sound startled both me and the creature. Its head snapped toward the jukebox, and for a split second, it was distracted. I didn't think. I just moved. I bolted for the door, my boots slamming against the tile. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech that made my ears ring, and I could hear it lurching after me. I slammed into the door, the bell above it jingling violently as I threw it open and stumbled outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't stop. The parking lot was eerily empty. No waitress, no trucker, and no truck. Just my car, sitting under the flickering neon sign of the diner. I sprinted toward it, fumbling with my keys as I heard the creature's footsteps behind me. It was faster than I expected, its skeletal limbs clicking and scraping against the asphalt as it closed the distance. I could feel it, practically breathing down my neck. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the keys. "No, no, no," I muttered, dropping to my knees to grab them. As I snatched the keys off the ground, I saw its shadow loom over me. I didn't dare look back. I shoved the key into the lock, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. The creature slammed into the side of my car just as I locked the doors, its bony hands clawing at the windows. Its face, or what was left of it, was inches from mine, its empty sockets staring at me, its mouth hanging open to reveal jagged, blood-stained teeth. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the car would start. The engine sputtered for a second, then roared to life. The creature let out another screech and slammed its fist against the windshield, cracking the glass. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the parking lot. Chased after me, its lanky frame moving unnaturally fast. But I didn't stop. I shifted into drive and floored it, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the highway. In my rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the middle of the road, its skeletal frame illuminated by my taillights. It didn't follow me, but it didn't move either. It just stood there, watching as I disappeared into the night. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station 20 miles down the road. I pulled into the lot, parked under the bright lights, and sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to catch my breath. The smell of that diner still lingered in my nostrils. The burnt grease, the metallic stench, and something else. Something I couldn't describe. I never went back to that highway. Never looked up Maggie's Diner to see if it still existed. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that faint dripping sound in my dreams, and I wonder if I really got away. I thought it was over. I thought the nightmare ended when I left that diner behind, but I was wrong. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with me. It was subtle at first, just small things. My car keys disappearing and showing up in strange places. The faint smell of burnt grease and metal in my apartment, even though I hadn't cooked in weeks. Then came the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself back in that diner. The jukebox playing its warped, distorted tunes. The trucker staring into his coffee cup. The waitress moving stiffly behind the counter, her eyes darting nervously toward the kitchen. And always that sound, the dripping. Drip, drip, drip. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound still echoing in my ears. But the worst part wasn't the dreams. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. One night, about a week after the diner incident, I woke up to the sound of movement in my apartment. It wasn't loud, just the faint creak of floorboards and the rustling of something being dragged across the floor. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, straining to hear. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. It was coming from the kitchen. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and crept toward the sound, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the bat steady. The kitchen was dark, but I could see a faint, wet trail on the floor, glistening in the moonlight streaming through the window. It led from the sink to the center of the room, where something was lying on the floor. I flipped on the light. It was the waitress. Her lifeless body lay crumpled on the tile, her stiff movements from the diner now making sense. Her limbs were bent at odd angles, her face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Blood pooled beneath her, forming a crimson trail that led to the sink. I stumbled back, barely able to keep myself upright. What the... Before I could finish, the lights flickered, and I heard it, that growl. Low, guttural, and impossibly close. I spun around, my back against the counter, gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles turned white. The air grew heavy, thick with that metallic stench. And then, from the shadows of the hallway, it emerged. The same skeletal figure from the diner, its empty sockets staring directly at me. Its jaw hung open, a low, rasping breath escaping its gaping maw. I don't know how I found the strength to move, but I swung the bat with everything I had. The impact barely fazed it. It staggered back a step but didn't fall. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. Not my phone, not my wallet, nothing. I bolted out of my apartment and into the cold night, my bare feet slapping against the pavement. I didn't stop running until I reached the all-night gas station down the block. The clerk gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside, gasping for breath. "You okay, man?" I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. I must have looked like a lunatic, barefoot and trembling, because he just handed me a bottle of water and said, "You should call someone." I glanced out the window, half expecting to see the creature standing there under the flickering streetlights. But the street was empty. For now. That was months ago. I don't live in that apartment anymore. I left the city entirely, moving halfway across the country to a place where no one knows me. I don't talk about what happened, not to anyone. But sometimes late at night I hear it again. Drip, drip, drip. And I know it's still out there, waiting. Months passed, but the fear never left me. No matter how far I ran, no matter how many miles I put between myself and that diner, it followed. The dreams became more vivid, more visceral, and the sound of dripping water became a constant companion in the quiet moments of my life. I started keeping the lights on at all times, sleeping with a knife under my pillow, and avoiding any place that felt remotely isolated. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. You can't run from something like that. The final straw came one night when I was driving home from a late shift at a warehouse job I'd picked up in the Midwest. It was raining, the kind of downpour that turns roads into rivers, and my wipers barely kept up with the torrent. The headlights illuminated only a few feet of the road ahead, and the world beyond was a wall of black. That's when I saw it. A sign. Faded, rusted, and barely visible in the rain, but unmistakable. Maggie's Diner 1 mile ahead. My stomach dropped, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. That couldn't be right. I was hundreds of miles away from that cursed stretch of highway. The rain intensified, hammering against the roof of my car. The headlights caught the outline of the diner as I rounded a bend. The same flickering neon, open 24/7 sign. The same cracked parking lot. My hands shook as I slowed the car to a crawl. I should have kept driving, should have pressed the gas and never looked back, but something compelled me to stop. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was madness. Or maybe it was the realization that running hadn't saved me the first time, and it wouldn't save me now. I pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. The rain pounded against the windshield, distorting my view of the diner. It looked exactly as I remembered it, as if no time had passed. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The air was heavy with the same metallic stench, and the jukebox in the corner played that warped version of Blue Moon. The diner was empty. No waitress, no trucker, no cook. Just me and the faint sound of drip, drip, drip. I walked to the counter, my boots echoing in the silence. A plate sat there, waiting for me. A burger and fries, just like the last time. I didn't touch it. Instead, I turned toward the swinging kitchen doors. They swayed gently, as if someone had just passed through them. I don't know what I expected to find. Closure, maybe, or answers. But as I pushed through the doors, all I found was darkness. The kitchen was silent, the metallic smell stronger here. I fumbled for a light switch, but there wasn't one. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the gloom, illuminating streaks of blood on the floor. And then I heard it. A faint, rasping breath. I spun around, the beam of light shaking in my trembling hand. It was there, standing just a few feet away. The creature. Its skeletal frame loomed in the darkness, its empty sockets fixed on me. Its jaw hung open, and that low growl rattled in its chest. I don't know what came over me, but something inside snapped. I wasn't going to run this time. Gripping the knife I'd started carrying, I stepped toward it, shouting, "What do you want from me?" The creature stopped, tilting its head as if it didn't understand the question. Then, it raised one bony finger and pointed at me. First, I thought it was mocking me, but then I realized it wasn't pointing at me. It was pointing behind me. I turned, and my flashlight revealed a mirror mounted on the kitchen wall. What I saw made my blood run cold. In the reflection, the creature wasn't standing behind me. It was me. My face was twisted and hollow, my eyes empty sockets. Blood dripped from my mouth, pooling at my feet. I stumbled back, dropping the knife. The reflection moved with me, its empty gaze locking onto mine. And then it spoke, in a voice that was both mine and something far darker. "You can't run from what you are." The mirror shattered, and the world went black. When I woke up, I was lying in the middle of an empty highway, the rain long gone. My car was parked nearby, engine off, keys still in the ignition. I looked down at my hands, half expecting them to be skeletal, but they were normal. I was normal, but I knew the truth. I'll never escape the diner because the diner isn't a place. It's a part of me now. And sometimes, late at night, when I catch my reflection in a window or mirror, I swear I see those hollow eyes staring back at me. I don't know how much longer I have, but one day, someone will stop at Maggie's diner. And I'll be the one waiting inside.